To know more such amazing stories from Indian history, click the bell icon and subscribe to Live History India.
From prehistoric petroglyphs to ancient cave networks and forts that are breathtakingly spectacular, the state of Maharashtra offers a fantastic window into the history of the region and the history of India. And it is with great pleasure that we announce a partnership with the Maharashtra State Archaeology and Museum Department to visually document the over 300 monuments and temples under it. We travel with the Director of the State Department of Archaeology, Dr. Tejas Garge, to Sinhagad Fort to discuss the scope of this partnership. Hello and welcome to this special episode of Tales and Trails. I'm Minnie Menon and we are coming to you from the Sinhagad Fort near Pune to announce a very, very important partnership for Live History India with the Department of Archaeology and Museums for the state of Maharashtra. And joining me today, it's Director Tejas Garge here. And over the next year, Tejas, we're going to be partnering with you, and we're very privileged to do that, to really chronicle and document the history of Maharashtra. It's a fabulous exercise, and especially given that it is Chhatrapati Shivaji's birth anniversary, it's an important marker, because as we stand here, it's impossible not to understand the legacy of this man who really created the idea of the Maratha state. But Maharashtra has so much more, right?
Definitely. And if you look at monuments at State Department of Archaeology, there's a vast chronological range. It starts with petroglyphs dating back to, say, 20,000 BC, and then we enter into historical era with Satvahan monuments, and we have some fabulous excavated sites like Ter and Nagadhan, which offer you glimpses of Satvahana Empire, and the wonderful remains of Brahmapuri in Kolhapur, which also shows connections with Roman Empire. So during Satvahana, it was internationally connected. So there are evidences from Satvahana era also. And that legacy continues in form of Vakataka monuments. And we come down to a very segment of initiation of temple architecture during 7th and 8th century. And we see monuments in Ter, especially temples, Trivikrama temple, which is upside-down, quite rare in case of Maharashtra, dating back to the 7th century. And that story continues in form of numerous temples, forts, which continues through all Shahis, and then it comes to Maratha period, British, and modern.
So it's really a synopsis of Indian history, so to say.
Right.
How many monuments would there be under the State Department?
There are about 376 monuments, and a major portion is temples. Those are about 146 temples and 60 forts. And rest of them are vadas, memorial tombs, and so on.
But you know, Maharashtra is also interesting because of its sheer size. People don't realize how big it is. Also, how diverse, because there is the Konkan coast and the coastal area. There is the interiors, which is really where we are, the Pune and the Ghats areas. And then there is the Vidarbha area, which is a much drier area moving into the Gond lands,
Right.
so to say. And that Nagpur is that edge. Now, how did geography play a role? You're an archaeologist, so tell me how geography played a role in defining the history of the state.
Definitely, geography shapes history. Geography shapes human life, and geography shapes human cultures. So if you look at the situation of Maharashtra, the major role is played by Western Ghats. So there's a division in terms of coast and so-called Ghats or flat plateaus. And Vidarbha is altogether a different entity. And these Western Ghats or Sinhagad hills, they have really played important role in rise of Maratha state. And I would say this was legacy of a local empire, the Nizam Shahs of Ahmednagar, and we have to give credit to Malikambar as well, whom Shivaji's father Shahaji Raje served. And during his times, this guerrilla warfare was initiated, and they could do it. They had this military idea only due to natural landscape. They had this rough terrain, they had these hills, mountains. So guerrilla warfare was effective. And Marathas were pretty used to that. And when they had to expand back in north, there was always a tussle between the traditional warfare and what they had to adopt something new in open plains.
And it's well reflected in the rock outcrop that we see behind you, because the Western Ghats are created by lava flows
Right.
and very very inimically part of the formation of the Indian subcontinent. It shapes this entire area, defines it, and also plays a very critical role, which is an area of your specialization, which is in the Roman trade network, in the entire early history of this region, because Sopara, Chaul, all of these ports become such important gateways into the Western world and in fact the
Right.
trading world, the Indian Ocean world.
Right.
So it's really fascinating how all of this comes together then.
Right. See, it's twofold. In a way, mountains they offer hindrance and they also offer economic opportunities. So first of all, they provided refuge for all the monks, and they were utilized by the Buddhists in order to create rocket caves. Uh, if you look at sheer number, out of 1200, there are about 700 caves in Maharashtra itself. So first of all, the use was religious, but the passes were always used by traders who were connected from coast to hinterland. So commercially they were important, and these crossing points were always occupied by religious entities. So it was a symbiotic relationship between traders and religious entity. So this is how the landscape got shaped. And slowly you see these religious entities turning into military garrisons. So earlier you had no concept of a hill fort, but rather the human habitation was protected, it was walled, it was surrounded with perimeters. And slowly the concept of military garrison evolved. So it was a specialized populace which shifted from plains to hills, and they occupied highest point which again got fortified. So whenever there was a calamity, whenever there was attack, people could always shift to these safe locations, and that is how they could retain control over the territory. So politically, forts they play a pretty important part.
And over this year, we hope to chronicle all of this stages, to put all of this in context. And I think that's a very important. We are very excited to be part of this partnership because it really allows us to do what we are supposed to be doing, which is really map Indian history, map its monuments, and put it in context, because everything is connected. And the cross connections between geography and history, between trade and history, between, as you said, early settlements and military garrisons that came across, that's very interesting. But from your point of view, talk about how you see this partnership really taking fruit, bearing fruit.
I'm really happy to be partners with Live History India. I share immense respect because whatever you put up online, it is historically well studied. So there's authentic information. And these days, people Google for information, and they look for some authentic information. Unfortunately, you see even people coming up to forts and monuments and making their YouTube documentaries and claiming something very randomly. And you don't see that with Live History India. That's very well researched. So officially, Government of Maharashtra is really privileged to be in collaboration with Live History India. And what we hope to put up authentic information. The authentic information which is collected by the department, and I think you guys are expert storytellers. And what we lack is narration, stories. We have raw data, and we need to connect with everybody, whoever uses digital platforms, and we need to present our data in form of stories, based on facts, based on authenticity, and let's take it to people.
Absolutely, and Tejas, for us, storytelling is possible because of the fact that we also work very closely with a network of historians and archaeologists, and we are very keen to partner with you to also see the whole process of documentation. At the end of the day, the process is as important as the end
Right.
result, because the amount of
Right.
research and hard work that goes into it. So let's talk about the 3-4 areas that we will be covering as part of the partnership. One is, of course, documenting the monuments, the sites, like you said, over 300 sites, really putting it in terms of context of time frame, era, etc. The second is the great conservation work you do, the great work that you do in terms of museums and the kind of wealth of knowledge you have over there. So take us through the documentation work, for instance, that you're doing.
See, documentation is very important, and unfortunately, traditionally, this was never given importance in traditional building management system of India. If you look at Western practices, they always kept chronicles of what they were doing. Unfortunately, we had to interpret all this data from secondary source. So, first of all, documentation is knowing what you have in terms of physical remains and in terms of loose objects. So it is basically recording all the architectural entities that you have. And documentation also enables you to differentiate different time zones. So if you look at certain moldings, then you know that this particular feature belongs to a certain era. So first of all, documentation gives you that timeline, that timetable on which your train runs. Even for conservation work, there are different layers of history, and as a conservator, you have to choose a certain layer which you need to present to people. So documentation remains of immense importance. First of all, in terms of photography. Second, conditional drawings, plans, elevation, even what kind of material has been used. So now there are modern technologies of 3D documenting objects and features. And now we have to convert all this document, even what we are doing now is a part of documentation. This is recording of a monument in a certain era. So, say 100 years down the line, if somebody looks at this soft data, they will know the condition of the monument and what we are doing. And of course, when we do conservation work, it is really important to reflect what you have actually done. So in later generations, they will know what interventions have been made in monument in what form.
Sure, and it will help conservation because
Right.
if you know what is being used, how it's being used, you'll also be able to do that. The other very important point of view from our perspective is, we believe that the only way to really nurture heritage is to get people passionate about their heritage.
Right.
And that is our mission, right? How do we make every Indian, every local aware of the history or the heritage around them? Because at the end of the day, it's their love that will help
Right.
nurture this. When you come to a place like this, it's only too evident, Tejas, because this is a living fort.
Right.
It's not something which is out of a history book. This is a
Right.
living fort. So I think this partnership would go a long way because we're also doing it in Marathi and we're also going to be doing it in Hindi to get the local population involved. And I think next time we talk, we should be able to really talk about the things that we've been able to achieve through this.
Right.
In the archaeology department, what do you see as the role of local communities?
When you talk about passion, I think there is enough of passion in Maharashtra. And I think what we need to do is bring that passion into a literate or educated form. So people look back at monuments with certain conscience. Of course, they have a lot of goodwill that there should be something good should happen to monuments. But everybody has their certain ideas, and the common belief may not agree with what experts recommend. For example, they want to rebuild all forts the way they were during Shivaji's time. And as per UNESCO norms or whatever guidelines are set up by Archaeology Department or Archaeological Survey of India, if you do that, there is a fear of losing authenticity. And financially also, it's a huge burden. So definitely, we should attempt restoration in certain areas. And I think we need to sensitize people about do's and don'ts, first of all. Then the love for heritage among the younger ones. I mean, why do we go to fort? To rejuvenate our passion, or it is just a hill fort and we are up here to have a view of to enjoy gorgeous weather? There could be n number of reasons. But I think most important is it gives you certain insight about your own future. the sense of pride, the sense of identity. And I think all these physical entities, they really help in rebuilding that identity.
This long line of people making their way up the Sinhagad fort indicates just how popular sites like this are. In fact, this fort has a special place in the history of Maharashtra and the city of Pune in particular. Formerly known as Kondhana, Sinhagad has a storied past.
The oldest reference are Delhi Sultanate conquering this area and Sinhagad being captured by uh, Delhi Sultanate from
Muhammad bin
Colis,
Tughlaq, yeah.
right, from local Colis. But they did not left anything in terms of structural remains. And truly, fort building activity in this area seems to have started during Bahmani times. And many of the structures, they owe their legacy to Nizam Shah of Ahmednagar. And of course, there was a constant struggle to retain this area between Adil Shah of Bijapur and Mughals. So, in a way, they took over all the areas which were practically controlled by Nizam Shahi. And Shahaji Bhosle, Shivaji's father, who was serving Nizam Shah, he had to take refuge to Bijapur's Adil Shah. So practically he was serving him, and this area was his Jahagir. And it was entrusted with Dadoji Konde, who was controlling this area. But of course, practically it was with Adil Shah of Bijapur. And this was one of the initial choices, along with Torna of Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj, to regain territory for Swarajya. And then there was in 1647, this was taken over by Shivaji, and again it had to be given back because his father was captured by Adil Shah of Bijapur. So he had to negotiate. So this fort went back to Adil Shah, and again they wanted to return it. So then then it was with Mughals. Then comes the famous Battle of Sinhagad of 1670.
With Tanaji, which has been, of course,
Tanaji.
immortalized with this movie, which we won't talk about, but it is a very significant battle.
It is a significant battle, and if you look at structural remains, when you're climbing, the triple layer entry from side of Pune, though the whole entity is known as Pune Gate, it was a triple layer fortification. And when you're approaching the fort, there's something called Darukhana for the storage of gunpowder. And there's another entity towards west called Kalyan Darwaja. So architecturally, there's a more or less continuity of legacy from Nizam Shahi, but it was rebuilt again to a great extent under Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj's regime. And if you look at this architectural practice, it's very ingenious. You don't have continuous fortification through and through. So you select a natural cliff, and wherever that natural cliff is not available, you build a wall. So in minimum economic efforts, you fortified this entire hillock. So the smartest, most economic strategy what Chhatrapati Shivaji invented.
It's also very historic. It's about 100 acres, and right behind me is a samadhi of Raja Ram, who is, of course, the husband of Tarabai, the second son of Chhatrapati Shivaji. He died over here. In fact, behind is a plinth where perhaps was their vada, where they said
He was cremated.
he was cremated over there. And this is very significant because he fought the Mughal army in Jinji for a long period, came over here, died within a year of coming over here, and Tarabai really takes on the fight further. And she's again a very, very interesting player. What would it have been like during the time when Rajaram and Tarabai came over here? Because it is as I said, a 100-acre plot, and there would have been people living over here.
Right.
It was a very important space for them.
I think it was a time of turmoil, uncertainty, and more or less physical entity is what you see. There are no major structural changes as such, but shifting population, fighting population, trying to regain control over their own territories. It must have been a tough time. And if you look at Rajaram's time, he had to face somebody like Aurangzeb. that too with very meager economic support. So he must have had a tough time, and he kind of died prematurely.
So this also becomes under the Peshwas a kind of a safe haven for the Peshwas.
Right.
And
right.
then interestingly, Lokhwani Tilak has a bungalow over here on the Sinhagad fort area. And Mahatma Gandhi is supposed to have come and stayed in Sinhagad. So it's a very interesting space because even through history, I mean, through the later part of history, there's a constant reference to Sinhagad.
Right. Constantly ownership is changing after Aurangzeb. It was again taken over by Marathas, and it remained with Peshwas for a long time. But if you look at Maratha Empire, physically it had expanded, it had gone beyond hills. So now this becomes a kind of leisure and refuge place during times of turmoil. There are certain records which shows that the Peshwa Khajina was transferred from Pune to Sinhagad. Whenever there was war, there was calamity, zanana and financial assets, they would be transferred to Sinhagad. And there are certain references to structure where it was stored, but of course physically that is not seen anymore. But interestingly, the later part also is important from the perspective of history. As you mentioned, Lokhwani Tilak, and he writes about Arctic home of Vedas right on Sinhagad.
Really? I didn't realize that.
That particular piece is a historical document which created a lot of turmoil, and still we learn in our textbook that Aryans and they came from Central Asia to India. The basic idea was the 6 months day and 6 months night. So that is how Tilak propagated idea of Arctic home of Vedas, and he has supposed to have written this article.
Sitting over here.
Yeah. So the history continues.
Right. I have two related questions. One which we missed because, if you see, and I was talking to Akshay about this, and when you see Chhatrapati Shivaji's forts, it's a sliver running from Pune, from Sinhagad, Rajgarh, and many of these forts are under you, right?
Right.
So it's a sliver that runs through these ghats, which becomes his fortress, really.
Right.
And they're some of the most spectacular forts in the country.
Yes, no doubt. And see, the entire military landscape is based upon guerrilla warfare. And the kind of economic resources that Shivaji enjoyed, I think it was not possible for him. Actually, enjoyed is not the right word. Meager parganas and finances that he had, it was not possible to control the larger territories, especially plains. So I don't think so practically it was possible for him to venture in the plains in given conditions. So you see a lateral expansion along the ghats, and of course he went towards sea because he realized the danger which was coming from the sea, the European powers. So he did venture into sea. You see n number of coastal entities coming up, fighting against the Western powers and the ghats. So it's all interwoven network of forts and villages, agricultural lands, which practically supported this landscape.
And we're going to have a great time documenting all of this, Tejas. It's really exciting. The last thing is really the challenge of managing this kind of a portfolio, if I use that word, right? Because you're also talking about the commercially perhaps the most richest areas. You're talking about living forts, communities that have lived over here for so long.
Right.
The constant pressure of urbanization. We've done work with you on the forts that you have under you in Bombay, for instance, in Mumbai. So there is a lot of challenge that you face, So how do you manage that, and what are the key learnings of how to really look at conservation and at the same time respect the fact that there are many challenges that there are?
Right. I think it is certainly an adverse situation where you see the highest urbanization of country taking place in Western India, and at the same time you have to manage heritage entities. So this is kind of crossing upon each other's interest, and you have to find the middle path. So the inspiration comes from Buddhist philosophy of adopting middle path, not going into conflicts and controversies, but to find a common ground for commercialization and sustenance of heritage. So that's the ideology. And another major inspiration comes from Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj himself. He managed his affair into meager economic support. So again, we have some limited financial resources, but idea is to create a common platform. And I'm really thankful to our present Secretary Culture, Mr. Saurav Vijay, that he came up with idea of a Mahavasa society, which will provide a common platform for heritage managers, the stakeholders in and around these heritage entities, and common public.
Which is great, which is really a coming together of all three stakeholders.
Right. And so far, there was no provision of taking CSR money. So this common platform, the commercialization will pay for heritage. So that is the idea behind Mahavasa Society.
It's a race against time to save our heritage.
Right.
And so
Indeed.
we all have to, harness all the goodwill that we can get, all the support that we can get, and come together as a community, I think. And that's the role of the media, that's the role of the archaeology department. And it's wonderful to see, you so open to associations, so open to actually getting new thinking into it and looking at how to nurture it. We look forward to this partnership, Tejas. Thank you so much.